Assalamu alaikum, I'm Muhammad Qureshi, and this is our very first show for The Real Agenda. The Real Agenda is about bringing you viewers at home into my classroom, and we're here to discuss various issues. And every show I'll bring an expert, someone who's experienced in their field, who can talk about a particular subject. And before we get on to our guest, I'd just like to introduce our sponsors. Okay, so thank you to the following sponsors: First Top Vehicle Solutions, SG9 Security, companyforsale.co.uk, First Kibla Tours, Brownhill Corporate Hire, Longridge Coaches Executive Travel. Right, my guest is Brother Yusuf Dar. Yusuf Dar is a former police officer, and he's currently a community activist who focuses on human rights and hate crime. And our subject today is the plight of the Uyghurs, or what's commonly called the Uyghurs. The Uyghurs are a Muslim community based in China, and they have a history, and it's coming hitting the headlines in recent times, where they're being subjugated and oppressed by the Chinese government. And what I will do is bring in Yusuf into this to tell us who the Uyghurs are and what they're going through. Yusuf.
Assalamu alaikum first, and thank you for having me on the show. I'm Mohammed Qureshi. Yeah, basically the Uyghurs are a Turkish descendant Chinese community that sit in the Xinjiang province, which is on the northwest or southwest of China, and it's in a very strategic area covering areas from Pakistan, Afghanistan to Tajikistan, and then Russia above that. So, and they've been there for hundreds of years. They're the direct descendants of the Turkish lords and people like Genghis Khan, etc.
Yeah. Excellent. And historically, there has been in recent history, especially, a lot of repressions. I mean, if you look at historically, there were different dynasties. There was control for that region. But since the current, and I think even the previous governing regime in China, because we've had for many years, we've had the Communist Party rule, and even before that, I think 1884 roughly, there was oppression against the Uyghurs and things to quell their religions and practice like that, and it's been on and off, but it's culminated into what we have today. And what are they going through?
Well, it's pretty much tantamount to what we've just gone through this week. It was Holocaust Memorial Day in the UK yesterday, and you could argue that they're actually going through the very essence of what genocide is. And we'll talk about the genocide model in a minute.
Yeah.
So we're looking at oppression on an industrial scale. We're looking at human rights abuses on an industrial scale. We're looking at surveillance 24/7, which is unparalleled in any other country.
Yeah.
You know, right down to facial recognition, to barcodes on the doors.
Yeah.
They basically know what each family does.
Okay.
So that's the extent to which it's gone, and also they're bringing in counter-terrorism laws and laws to kind of further infringe on the human rights.
Right. So it's almost like a police state within a state kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at, if you go away on Google and research some of the things that have been done, for example, I mean, at the moment, they've got detention camps. They estimate conservatively that up to 2 million Uyghurs are in so-called concentration camps, but the Chinese government calls them education camps. So that's the other side of it. Apart from the surveillance, you've got about 2 million who are in the camps, and we won't even go to the problem of where kids are abducted and the organs of the Uyghurs are actually sold and harvested as well. So it's a massive kind of area of abuse. And as I said, it falls perfectly into the genocide model, and we're not far off the completion of that model.
Right. Okay. I mean, my curiosity look at the Uyghurs and what they go through. I mean, I saw like satellite imagery of these camps. I saw journalists trying to go into China, going to the Xinjiang province, trying to enter these places. Even the journalists were followed 24/7 everywhere they went. They were stopped, or some excuse. I mean, roadblocks would mysteriously appear to stop them going any further. Talking to people was difficult. Finding things out was difficult. I mean, if China truly, as it says it is, or that this is a non-issue, is being taken, over the top, then why the need for such hounding of journalists?
Absolutely. If there were straightforward education camps, even in a communist country, I would have thought China would have been very keen to open the doors and show the world how well they're doing with so-called re-educating people from so-called extremism, if that's what they are doing. But clearly these are not camps for education, because if people who've come out of them, there's some a direct account from individuals who've been released, subsequent released, some who've escaped luckily. There's satellite imagery, and they come from multi-sources, so it's not as though we talk of the old fake news. This is real, because this has been evidence from CNN to the BBC to ITV to basically every news media you can think of. And then couple that with the reports that are out there from the UN to the US to individual kind of Amnesty International. So all reputable independent reports that corroborate the scale and what's actually happening in these camps.
I mean, my understanding was that even before it reaches the media, you'd have the UN, the human rights organisations who'd be documenting these cases, talking to witnesses before it actually gets the media attention. Right, so other things I was looking at with the situation with the Uyghurs was, like you were saying, surveillance. They were showing that the surveillance is so good, the CCTV so good, that it's actually face matching multiple people at times, and there's cameras all around the towns and cities in that particular province. And you talked about, we've been hearing recently, is about how males are taken away for so-called re-education, and then they have other men come to sleep with their wives. Yeah,
Chinese officials. I mean, that's one of the ways China is saying. China's excuse is that, look, while the males or families away, they're giving support to the family, and they're bringing in Chinese party officials who can realign that family back to Chinese values, so-called. But also, from what people have said in corroboration, not only do they do that, they actually take over the role of the husband, where they're literally sharing the same bed as the wife. And these are just snippets of what this community has gone through since this kind of the scale of this started around about 2014, 2017,
Yeah.
and it's gained pace as it's gone along. It's got bigger and bigger.
Excellent. So, I mean, we talked about a particular type of genocide model. At the moment, I mean, have we heard about, for example, when we use the word genocide, we think of mass killing, mass graves, massacres,
Yes.
Indiscriminate. Yeah. Is that what's happening now in China?
Pretty much, yeah. There's an organisation, NGO organisation, which is run by Professor Gregory Stanton, who's one of the leading lights on genocide, because his research kind of covers the Holocaust, Bosnia, Rwanda, amongst other areas, and he's looked at key features that present themselves in the genocide model, and there are 10. Now I'll kind of read them out. The first is you basically classify people, you divide them as a them and us. So you turn around to the populace and say, they, who you've picked, this community that you've picked, or these groups, they are not part of us. So they are they and we are us. So there's this separation. Then you look at symbolization of identity and destroying that identity, and that's happening to the Uyghurs. You then have discrimination, and all these are systematic. So systematic discrimination from jobs, from opportunities, from travel, that's being done to the Uyghurs.
Yeah.
You then go on to the next stage, which is the fourth stage, which is dehumanization of the individuals. So they are no longer people, they're animals, vermin, or even lower, cockroaches. We've heard of other politicians, for example, the BJP has called the Bengali Muslims vermin, rats, cockroaches. And the Chinese have done a similar thing in the way they've done that. Then there's an organisation of how you organise civil and bodies representing government to deal with them. So, for example, China has got a police service. That police service has grown. There is constant, not just surveillance, but constant monitoring and dealing with these individuals. So there's a structure in place. You then go on to polarisation, which is coming up to point 6. And that is where you spread propaganda to make sure the populace buy into your narrative. That these people are not us. These people are causing issues for us and the country. You then go into the preparation, into getting ready for what you're going to do. And that means things like you destroying places of worship, which is happening.
Yeah.
You're actually getting a structure ready to deal with them, i.e. camps. The Nazis did that to the Jews, exactly following that model. They went through that, creating the camps, gas chambers, etc. The Chinese are doing that. You then go on to persecution, which is now at level 8.
Yeah.
We're at level 8 because the Uyghurs have been persecuted for decades. The one thing that's left is extermination. That's 9.
Okay.
And the Uyghurs, you could argue that they've started on that road of extermination, and then the last point is denial. The Chinese have also gone into the denial area. So we're just one step away, for me, for this being classed as fulfilling the genocide model.
Fulfilling the genocide model.
Yes.
So we've not actually got to the stage of mass killing yet, but what it's essentially, this model is essentially saying is that there's a method to the madness.
Absolutely.
Basically.
We might not have got to mass killings, but we've got harvesting of the organs allegedly, and and that's part we're there because you're taking someone's organs for economic benefit.
Yeah.
So they're pretty much, apart from that one phase, we're pretty much on the completion of the model. Because at the moment, again, just kind of refreshing and reminding the people out there, is that Genocide Watch actually monitors all countries, and at the moment there are some places that are on the watch list or the warning list for genocide taking place. The Houthi community, in Yemen.
Yeah.
The Kashmiri community in Kashmir. The Bengali community in Assam, where these areas are classed as being on the genocide model and have fulfilled the requirements to be classed.
Right. Okay. So we're just going to mention a few things, just in relation to the show. you're watching us live on UCTV. It's The Real Agenda, and you can catch us on facebook.com /UCTV.co.uk and my Community TV on YouTube. Okay, our website is www.uctv.co.uk. Okay, we just got a comment on Facebook. Okay, from one of the viewers. It's a brother says human rights being abused, but are Muslim nations still trading with them, and the leaders deny or act like they don't know anything about it. With all the evidence available, no one will do anything to take on the powerhouse of China. And that's his sentiment.
Well, sadly, there's an element of truth in that, because China constantly refers to 54 nations that sided with China and supported it in the UN when the debate came on challenging China on the Uyghurs. And out of the 54, the vast majority of them were so-called, and I say so-called, Muslim countries.
Yeah.
So they're absolutely right. And again, unfortunately, in today's world, when you look, I think human rights seems to take second place to trade.
To trade, yeah.
And economic benefit and military benefit. So absolutely. Unfortunately, that's the case with the Uyghurs as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen things recently where, like the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Sultan, he's turned around and said what the Chinese doing is okay. You know, they're combating extremism.
Yes.
So therefore, it's okay. Turkey's been 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Sometimes you know, they're saying something. The other time they're saying, "Okay, we've been there," and they're fighting extremism. Imran Khan is mum about it, and it's all to do with, you know, China's beneficial for us. He says that they're a breath of fresh air. They've helped them economically, and it looks like it's a case of don't bite the hand that feeds you. He's not acknowledging the problem, but it's at the same time he's like saying that, you know, whatever we would say we would do in private anyway, we wouldn't do it publicly because it's China.
Well, to be fair, I think it's unfair sometimes to put the pressure on Muslim countries because they're not in a position to be accountable or show any level of governance. So it depends on the person who's in charge.
Yeah.
Whereas in the West, we are democracies, and we have certain values, and we aspire for certain values, i.e. human rights.
Of course.
Whereas in some of the Muslim countries, I'm sad to say, those aren't values that are appreciated or even pursued. So I don't think we should just look at the Muslim community or so-called Muslim countries, because I think that's a gimme. I would not expect them to be standing up for human rights because they're compromised. They have conflicts of interest. Many have conflicts of interest in China, whether they're military, whether they're economic.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's the problem with the world. And you could argue some of the Western countries are exactly the same, because if you look at Kashmir,
to an extent,
no one's for 70 years, no one's done a thing
because of the
we
trade.
haven't spoken up because of the trade. And the same thing applies. We don't want to upset China again from a British perspective, because the Americans have been the only ones who've debated this in Congress and who've actually imposed sanctions on Chinese officials. They are one of the only governments that have done that. The British government, we've had a debate, we've spoken to them, but other than that, I don't think we've done anything constructive yet.
So in respects, maybe you know, China's similar to in its magnitude to Russia. There's very few countries who are prepared to challenge it on what it's doing.
It's not. Yeah, it's not.
On one hand.
It's not. My view is I don't think it's a military issue. I think it's more of an economic, because China is one of the biggest economies in the world. You know, after the United States, China and Europe is a massive economy. So I think people are concerned about their economic benefits, and their economic policies might get affected.
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking of the Muslim countries. I'm even talking of the Western countries, because they all want to trade with China.
Absolutely. I mean, in terms of trade with China, we've been hearing a lot. We heard from Trump late last year and even this year about Huawei which is a Chinese mobile company,
Yeah.
rolling out 5G networks, and the US banned to stop Huawei using its technology to roll that out across the UK. And currently we're having pressure being put on the British government by the Americans to say, you know what, you need to think twice before allowing Huawei to actually roll out its technology in the UK for our 5G networks, and the government's considering that. But the thing is that is, for what I see that as an example, is that's a challenge in some sort, in an economic sense, to China. Whether the accusation of the technology being able to spy on entire nation is true or not, it's being used as a tool to say, don't trade with China as far as 5G goes. But the thing is, would Muslim countries in the region have the guts to do that? I don't think they would.
The problem is, at least it's being debated in the Western countries. So if you look at what we're talking about, the 5G, I think today the developments, if I remember rightly, is Boris Johnson's approved the use of 5G and Huawei 5G in the UK.
Yeah.
Apart from military and sensitive sites, they'd be looking to control that. But the Americans, I think it's a bit more deeper. It's not just about the concept of surveillance potentially. I think it's more that Huawei is grown immensely and is a direct kind of competitor to Apple, to the iPhone. So I think the Americans feel that maybe that if they went down the road of allowing Huawei to come into the UK freely, that Apple and the iPhone would suffer.
Yeah.
And at the moment, the iPhone is one of the leading brands and one of the leading mobile hardware that's around. So I think it's not quite straightforward.
One, but here they are.
Yeah. So there's that complex issue with what the Americans are saying. I don't think it's just about the human rights and surveillance. I think it's more about trade and value again.
Of course,
because Apple will lose a chunk of the market.
Yeah, and they're using this pretext to do it. I mean, any intelligent person could see that, but obviously they're like pushing about these conspiracy theories that they're going to. It's surveillance on everyone kind of thing. And
I was listening to some of the debate today on TV briefly on 5G being allowed in the UK, and it was this, that you can't stop innovation. That innovation is going to help our industries to develop and to improve. Therefore, you can't stop it.
The thing we're sidetracking slightly going into the economic side of it, but technology-wise, I mean, what didn't we get from China historically for decades? And suddenly there's an issue. It's like or open up any electronic gadget, and most of the bits from there will be Chinese. If not
absolutely, China produces pretty much everything now, and exports. It's probably one of the biggest exporters. It's and that's the other fear. You're looking at a powerhouse here that's going to get bigger, and we don't want to lose a percentage of that market.
Is that something which can allow genocide, being too powerful that nobody can stop you doing it?
Yes, it can do, but sadly, we're now living in 2020, and it shouldn't. It shouldn't be happening. If it was happening in the 18th or the 19th century, you would probably understand some of the reasoning and why it wasn't stopped and challenged. Today, for example, I mean, the information technology and the spread of information is you're a second away from the other side of the world. As soon as you hit the send button, people from New Zealand, Australia have access to what you've just said, or Japan or China.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, and that's been the benefit of the Uyghurs, because no matter how much you try and stem it and deny it, in today's world, what these countries haven't learnt is that sooner or later, the truth will come out. We're not living in the 18th and 19th century. Absolutely.
So, look, I usually, especially when it comes to suffering of Muslims around the world, we hear time and again that, that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ used to tell us that the Ummah is like one body, and if part of us hurts, we should all feel the pain. And we know there's different standards in different places in the world, and Muslim countries haven't really got their act together, etc. But, Yusuf, what can we, as Muslims in the West, do about it to highlight these plights, so that we can engage and draw attention to these issues so that sufficient pressure can be put onto a country to stop doing what it's doing?
Well, the first thing key is one, awareness and information. The more information you have, the more power you have. Information is power.
Yeah.
I suggest that when you speak to most of our communities, very few of them know about this issue, because we as a small group, the Community Safety Forum, did the first conference in Manchester, and it was well attended. But even people who attended there, having spoken to them afterwards, they admitted that they'd never heard of it.
Yeah.
Out of sight, out of mind is Uyghurs are virtually on the other side of the world, and they're not people that are very well known within the Muslim community as well. That's the other side of it, because our focus has been around Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, all those areas.
True.
Palestine. So the Uyghurs have been off the radar. So the first thing I would suggest is we raise our awareness on that. 2, we look at how we can share that with other people, so we're improving that, cascading that down. 3, I would say we all look at writing to our MPs, because every MP is there to serve you. Yeah, we should be going and taking this challenge up with the MPs and asking the MPs to raise it in Parliament, to have a proper debate about this, in terms of 1, a debate, and 2, what's the UK position? Because the Americans have already gone down the road of sanctions.
Yeah.
Which is fabulous, and they've had a very good debate on this. We've had a debate, very little done. So start off with that, and then even write to the UN, write to the Chinese consulate or embassies that are here in the UK. That's a start off point. I think that would be very good, because what's lacking at the moment is 1, awareness, 2, lobbying, and 3, any political action. So how do you deal with those? We need to encourage all 3 of those areas: awareness, lobbying, and political action. We need to make sure we get people involved, and it's not just the Muslims, it's the non-Muslims as well.
Of course.
If we could do that, we would probably help the Uyghurs a lot, because let's not forget, it's only recently that again we did a conference on, I think we were one of the first that did a conference on the Rohingya.
Yeah.
It is now almost 3 decades after that the ICC has found them culpable and held them to account for what's happened.
Yeah, so you've got
we don't want
the
the Uyghurs to have 3 decades of this abuse. So we're in a better position to learn how to make things happen now. Yeah.
Yeah, I get what you're saying there. So, I mean, look, from my understanding is that, look, you talk about, this comes down to political participation in a sense, where we're engaging with the authorities, the MPs, different organisations, to bring awareness to this issue.
Yes.
Media being one of them. Yeah. And look, I would say, regardless of what people's position is on elections, which have just gone, whether we should participate or not, at the end of the day, regardless of what your stance was, as far as the system's concerned, these are still your representatives. Whoever your MP is still your MP. Your government department ministers are still the ministers, and the human rights organisations are doing all their work. And we can just arrange. I mean, yourself, was it just this weekend you did a conference on the same subject in Batley? So it's raising awareness in the community. So there's activism in the communities, and talking to the relevant figures in authority.
Absolutely. I mean, the point you make is hugely important. I think one of the other things is a side issue. We might be digressing a bit. Is about the engagement of the Muslim community with politicians. While we are doing it, I think there needs to be structure, and we've got a new government in place. This government's here for 5 years. It's our government, represents us. We need to make sure that we equally hold that government to account, and that includes your local MP. Your MP is there to serve you, unlike in other countries. Your MP is there. I mean, I've actually seen the power of that, where I've walked into Parliament and done what I call a green card. You fill in a green card, your MP has to come up and see you. That doesn't happen in many places. They might fob you off, in a northern terminology, which means they might ignore you,
Yeah.
but they will come up and see you. And I've seen that. And you can go and see your MPs. That is one thing we're very poor at, unfortunately, as a community, in terms of political engagement, political activism. So we need to make sure that, one, we engage that process, and for the next 5 years, we don't pull ourselves out of it. Because on issues like this and any other, nothing's going to happen unless we can inform the government on what our concerns are. Because if the government don't know, and they're not being raised, they're perfectly within the right to say, look, hang on a minute, it's not a problem. It's not a problem for us, because none of our citizens have raised it. You know? So, my view would be, do all that. And the other thing is, educate yourself. I mean, what we asked people to do when they came to the conferences was give us 5 minutes of their time. And in those 5 minutes, we wanted people, for example, again in this country, I don't know if you know, I'm sure you do, is that you can write directly to the PM on their website. You can go on the website and they'll tell you what the PM's done that week and what they intend to do for 3 months.
Yeah, tell you, what they voted for, what they
voted for. So we've got that process. And it's just 5 minutes. If we all took 5 minutes of our time just to write one email on this, there are 4 million Muslims in the country.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean, look, you need to be on every issue round the clock and make this.
Absolutely,
your life. If anything is of concern to you,
yes,
you can do something about it.
Well, there's a system. And the other thing is we need to engage the UK. The UK has a system, and there's a structure to it. And the structure is about engagement and consultation with communities and citizens. We need to understand that, and we need to engage in that process.
Yeah.
Some of us don't, for various reasons, and that's been our pitfall.
Even then, I'd say that, look, that's fine, because people are entitled to their view. That's fine. Yes. But there's two halves to this circle, and one is where there are the mechanisms of the political channels. Yeah, if you want to call them that, those mechanisms that are there, and there is external pressure outside the system, which can be through media, through community activism, and other forms of activism.
Yes.
And obviously, okay, if both are incorporated together, that's great. But if people have their issues, if they're a bit, how can you say, pedantic about approaching those channels, political channels, because they've got certain views towards that, at least support the activities in the community regarding it, and and other people might be doing the other stuff. But I think there needs to be something. If we all contribute some effort, we can at least harness it in a particular direction to get the right pressure put on a particular issue.
Yeah, and it's very doable. As I said, it's just 5 minutes. It's just literally 5 minutes of your time in sending an email. As I said, 4 million Muslims, basic statistics, a quarter of them send an email, that's 1 million. It's a lot of emails.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of emails and a lot of lobbying. And I think the government would take notice.
Yeah.
And one of the other things we've kind of digressed a bit is the scale of what's happening to the Uyghurs. For example, satellite imagery, I talked about it earlier. There is tremendous evidence from various sources, corroborated sources and independent sources, that shows the scale. For example, mosques are disappearing on an industrial scale.
Yeah.
Now you see them, now you don't.
Now you don't.
Cemeteries, they've not even left the cemeteries alone. They're actually cleansing the cemeteries and creating parks or other areas, or lakes or whatever. And on some, you see horrific images of just the ground still has bones of the late deceased who were buried there. That is to the extent to which they've gone. And with the laws they've brought in, it's literally an offence to be a Muslim, because you can't have Islamic names, you can't read the Quran, you can't grow beards. These are just some of the things. And when they go into the concentration camps, they're made to drink alcohol, eat pork, and they take it a stage further, where they've actually got people to marry, Muslim girls and boys to marry Chinese, and vice versa. So the extent to which this human rights abuses are going on is just unparalleled. Honestly, I have researched and done work around others. This is on a grander scale, and has taken it to a different thing. They basically want to get rid of any kind of link of Islam and the Uyghurs to China. They just want them to be Chinese, period, and Islam needs to go, because they've fallen down the trap of what other countries have. Islam is equal to terrorism. Yeah.
To be honest, we've seen I wouldn't say in Britain the genocide model is being followed, but with the prevent strategy and how one particular community, the Muslim community, is being targeted more than others, how they think that any apparent showing that Islam as identity, practicing Islam, or perhaps factors of extremism, just by showing that you're a practicing Muslim. We've seen certain even with reports that going round from certain police authorities further south, where these issues have been exposed, that these are factors they're looking for. We don't have it as bad as what the Chinese have it, but then if we look at the first thing I saw when I looked at China and its mass surveillance of Muslims, camps, re-education centres, all the rest of it, it was basically prevent on steroids, is what a term I keep throwing about. Could something like that happen in Britain?
I'd like to think not, because we live in Britain. I think there's a level of governance, there's a level of accountability, but one can never say never, because if you look at how the war in Iraq kind of developed, it basically went against all the principles of normality. You look at prevent, the same thing again. But one thing I'll say about prevent is, as you well know, I've been a strong kind of critic of prevent. Is when you look at the document you're talking of, the old saying is, when people talk of human rights abuses, is the example of, when they came for the Irish and no one stood up for the Irish, and they came for the blacks, no one stood up for the blacks, they came for the Jews, no one stood up for the Jews, and they came for me, there was nobody there. And that logic of prevent is applied in that document, because within that document now is you got people who are non-Muslims, who are people like stop racism campaigns,
human rights campaigners, the eco-warriors.
So everyone's fallen foul of that. And
this was unheard of. Even if you went back 12 months, you wouldn't have heard of this. It was always the Muslims. And then towards the end, they slipped in far right. And now it's not just the far right, it's even environmental work. And
they're basically lobbyists. I mean, you're talking of lobbyists and campaigners who've been put on that list, and many people have come up, and many personalities, police officers, others have come up, and politicians have said that's just abhorrent and wrong.
And even
but nevertheless, there were.
Over a decade ago, when we said, look, that these counter-terrorism laws and the prevent strategy and all the rest of it is there to curtail people's freedom and take it away, they wouldn't believe it. They say, it's just the Muslims, it doesn't apply to us.
Well, one would like to think that some of these organisations will learn their lesson, because when the challenges were being made on prevent, a lot of them were silent, and the old saying, it doesn't apply to us, and therefore why do we need to get involved? If it's happening to them, let them get on with it. The thing with India is another example. If you look at what's happened in Kashmir, for 70 years there have been abuses, they've been imprisoned for 5 months, and the Indian the wider community wasn't that interested. And all of a sudden, when they brought similar laws and rules in Assam and in India, and they've started arresting protesters en masse, and the police are going around acting like a bunch of thugs. Now, all of a sudden, the rest of the Indian populace has decided, whoa, hang on a minute, what are we dealing with here with the BJP? But I still go back to your original question. I'd like to think that scale and that extent would not happen in the UK and in any country where you have accountability, transparency, which we have here. That's not to say where mistakes are not made, because we've just discussed an area where they clearly have. But I'd say, going down the road of genocide, I'd say no in the UK. And I hope I'm right.
Yeah, I hope you're right too. Because we just see snippets of this, and we think that, look, I think the first thing we do is go back to something that was commemorated just yesterday, which we mentioned at the beginning, which was Holocaust Memorial Day.
Yes.
That, look, you start to demonize one particular community, and that's where it begins. It begins with the demonization, and then slowly but surely, sometimes over a decade or two, it ends up somewhere else completely. And it's just the case of turning that blind eye. It's only that community, it doesn't affect us, so
well, the Holocaust is a powerful reminder, and again, as I was going through the model, Professor Stanton actually analysed all that, and if you look at the Holocaust, many have said it before, it didn't just start with the gas chambers. It started with little comments, little policies, small little snippets here and there of bigotry stepping in and being normalised. And you could argue that bigotry has been normalised in the UK and in Europe, because when you look around in Europe, and the concern for someone like me who's an activist is, you look at Europe, the growth of the far right has been a real threat. And even in the UK, as much as I'm not party politically based, when you have 500 members of the EDL and Britain for 5,000 of Britain First and the EDL who've joined the Conservative Party, that is a scary moment.
Of course.
And then when you have Tommy Robinson, who's actually Tommy Robinson, Katie Hopkins, Paul Golding, from Britain First, he allegedly has joined the Conservative Party. Now you start worrying that are we losing the plot? And we need to see a reaction. We need to see a reaction in this country to things like that. The challenge and the challenging of those narratives of far right and bigotry. Otherwise, we might end up going down a slippery road.
Slippery road that, not too long ago, just a couple of years ago, even Baroness Warsi was saying that Islamophobia has passed the dinner table test. You can't. Let's be honest. You can't have newspaper headlines, vilifying Jewish people the way they do Muslims. If you were to replace the word Muslim in some of those headlines with the word Jew, it'd be outright unacceptable. But sometimes it's past that test where it's all right to do it to the Muslims.
Well, you could argue, go back to the Uyghurs, because we focus back to the Uyghurs. You could argue that in itself is part of what Islamophobia really is. It's a fear and phobia about Islam and Muslims, and the Uyghurs. You could argue there's an element of that, but I think there are issues in the UK. We are slipping back in terms of equality and diversity. Simple anecdotal evidence of. If you're a football fan, you look at what's happened on the football field with black players. Paul Pogba misses a penalty. He gets absolutely abused on social media. Marcus Rashford's another one. We've had other black players who've been abused for simple things. And this is in the 21st century when we're supposed to be more equal and more compliant with human rights. And clearly, we're not best ever.
Viewers, there's a very important reason that I allow this to veer off course and bring it back to Britain and things like Prevent and far right movements in Europe, etc. And it's because that these are all indicators pre-genocide, and we take these indicators like from the Holocaust, where it starts with demonisation, and we need to draw lessons. What's happening with the Uyghurs is isolated issue, focused in the geographic location within China. But, like Brother Yusuf has explained to us, there's experts who've gone through what's called the genocide model. And that's taken from previous genocides, previous atrocities, and there's a pattern. And just like we don't like to see this pattern of behaviour unravel in China, we don't want to see it anywhere else. And as we come to, the latter part of the show, and open that up, Yusuf, and say, look, this genocide model, what other places is it affecting right now? And maybe we might not get into our teeth into it right now, but maybe in the future we shall. But can we go there?
Yeah, we could look at other countries and look at the model. But as I alluded to earlier, there's only some countries that have been classed as being of interest or approaching the genocide model, and those are the ones I mentioned. But one of the other things we kind of didn't cover too much on is the complicitness of our position and other countries. For example, when Hitler took over Germany. He was democratically elected, so-called democratically elected, and we could see what was coming, but we were complicit because we didn't think he was a bad guy.
We could just turn around and today say, Narendra Modi is democratically elected. Spot
on. Exactly the same kind of stuff. Is we've been complicit again, and it's all to do with trade. We look at China, we've been complicit again. Satellite imagery clearly tells you. Unfortunately, we're in a world where you can no longer hide forever, because the satellite imagery and the technology makes it available. Our first kind of conference on the Uyghurs was called the Wall of Silence. The Great Wall of Silence.
Great Wall of Silence.
Because that's what it's been. We've been complicit. We've been complicit in Kashmir. We've been complicit in not speaking up about the Uyghurs. We were complicit on the Rohingya, which has just recently come to light. We've been complicit about Assam. We were complicit in Germany. We were complicit when the Native Americans got cleansed. We were complicit when. So I think there has got to be a time when we have to look to our politicians to show some mettle and challenge these areas, because we're constantly talking about British values and human rights. We can't then sacrifice them willy-nilly for a pound.
Yeah.
It's not like going to a pound shop. We are giving these away very cheaply.
Mm-hmm. So, one of the viewers was asking, do we as Muslims isolate ourselves from other faiths in the UK, but when Muslims have an issue, we put our hands out for support, so it's always our issues that we want to support for, but what about everyone else? Do we need to sort of open our horizons too?
I think listen, I'm a critic where there's evidence, and I'm a critic of everybody where we can improve, and clearly the Muslim community can improve, because we have been defensive at times, and I can understand why, because of what's been happening with the Muslim community. But sometimes at these times you've got to show vision and leadership, and we need to reach out, because and we're starting to do that now. To be fair, I think the Muslim community is a lot further than it was.
It was.
I think the last 10 years, if you look, there's been fantastic partnership work with the Muslim community. The mosques are coming on board, but clearly more can be done, because as I said, I'm a critic.
Yeah.
And I want to see more.
When I think of that, we'd always have that saying, whatever we do, we'll be able to say, we could do more.
Absolutely. The sign of any person with any kind of mettle and understanding would be, you always look at yourself, whether you're working or whether you're with your friends, and you review that and say, look, could I have done that better? Yeah. And I think the Muslim community needs to look at that, and that's where we are at the moment, is whilst we're going on that journey, we've improved, we should constantly be looking at ourselves and saying, can we have done better? And we need to be doing things more in partnership rather than in isolation.
Excellent.
With other communities, other organisations,
Yeah, well, you're watching us live on UCTV. You need to follow us on Facebook on facebook.com/UCTV and Umar Community TV on YouTube. Our website is www.uctv.co.uk. Yusuf, it's been great having you. Okay, and as we wrap up, I would say, we've talked about activism and engaging, but as communities that are grassroots, do you recommend anything what we can do at the grassroots level to draw attention to these things before we get to encourage others to take those other steps?
I think what I said earlier, 5 minutes of time and learning about what your rights are, where you can access certain information, where you can send certain information, who you can share it with. Partnership work. I think the great thing about these events is you work with other bodies. Whether it's Stop Racism, whether you're working with Liberty or Amnesty International, or your local faith groups, whether they're Hindu, Christian, Jew, or non-faith groups. I think we need to look at all that, because if just the Muslim community does it, it doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
Because this is clearly about human rights and abuses. And the vast majority of the Brits are very strong on those. So I think we need to be looking at those friendships and bringing them on board with this debate.
I think if you look at the attitudes, I mean, we discussed what things are like here, prevent and all that kind of thing. And let's be honest, ever since 9/11, Muslims have been on that uphill battle to try and get some recognition without having a label put on our forehead. But the thing is, we need to realise as a minority that there's only so much we can do as just, it's just our issues and that's it. Because we're a minority. We need to be reaching out and build bridges and then strengthen alliances and move things forward, because we need to realise what we only so much you can do as like 2-3% of a population. Would you agree? Well,
we're only at top kind of whack with 4 million in the country out of a potentially 61 million.
Yeah.
Call it 60. So you're looking at 56 million or 57 million non-Muslims.
Yeah.
Now, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to work out who's going to have more impact. So that's what we should, and I've advocated that many times and told Muslims that, the priority really needs to be to engage with the 54 million as opposed to the 4 million. The 4 million are important as well, but we should not neglect the 54 million, because if we get the 54 million on board with this, for example, and you'll find as soon as people are aware of it, whether it's Amnesty or Liberty and Amnesty have done their work on it, or whether it's Stop Hate, or Stop Racism, all those lobbyists, they will come on board because they've all got an interest in stopping abuses and human rights abuses,
Yeah, that's it.
That's what it comes down to. We need to work more on those, but at the same time, we also need to work in our community, our small community, to educate them. But at grassroots level, I say always work in partnership.
Yeah.
Don't work by yourself. I think we need to encourage the Muslim community to be more outgoing and reaching out more to the wider community.
I mean, I see it as getting things done, especially on this particular issue where we're talking about people's lives. People's lives are, at stake. We're talking about specifically about the Uyghurs. Another thing, genocide isn't. It's a serious issue.
It's certainly not. It's certainly not moving. And what you said is we didn't talk about every aspect of the Uyghurs, the kind of threats they face. Even when they're abroad, the Chinese government has a long arm. So people who speak abroad, Uyghurs who speak abroad, their families get directly affected and threatened and dealt with. Students have been sent back from various countries, including Muslim countries, who the Chinese government had asked them to be sent back, Uyghurs, and they've been sent back and they've disappeared. So they've gone back to China straight into the camps. So, as I said, we've only touched on the surface of what goes on with them. It is really shocking to find out in the 21st century this is going on, and it's not long ago we were dealing with the Rohingya or the Kashmiris.
Yeah.
So when politicians say never, I think they need to start looking at meaning never again from the Holocaust. Yeah. We've been saying never again continually.
Several times, yeah.
Well, more than several times.
Every time something
more than several times. So we need to really make an effort to make sure we put an end to this, irrespective of your colour, your race, your religion.
So never means
never. It should never happen.
Never should be. Never should.
Absolutely, it should never. And all of us need to be standing up to it, and all of us need to be challenging. But the politicians have a greater responsibility. I would like to think our PM, when he's made aware of this, and that's the other issue, if the PM becomes aware of it, I like to think he'd stand up for so-called British values and human rights.
Yeah.
And democracy, because that's what we're constantly preaching to the world.
We're constantly preaching to the world, it's true.
We need to show that.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, by far and large, we do see that happening, but we always see this, and we point it out, it's hypocrisy. It's all right to an extent, but you will have those examples where there's a blind eye being turned to human rights, democracy, etc., when it doesn't suit, and it all comes down to the bottom dollar.
Yeah, it's money is something, but again, as I said, look, we live in a country which is as good as it gets in terms of democracy and accountability. It's not perfect, but we've got accountability, governance here, transparency, which other countries don't even dream about.
We can speak.
So it's up to the rest of us as citizens
Yeah.
to uphold those values and to challenge the politicians and the powers to be who are not performing.
Yeah, Yusuf makes a good point here. Okay, there may be the Uyghurs can't speak up or do anything, or they'll have threats to their families back home. But we can speak for them. We've got voices. We've got platforms such as this.
Absolutely.
We can be active in the community. So, we can behave like one body. If there's a problem with another part of the body, we can do what they can't. If they don't have the energy to do it, we can do it. If they're threatened and they're, we don't live under threat. If I say something, nobody's going to threaten my family. If we've got those.
Not unless you're taking my kebab.
So that's. So we've. We're not saying that we're problem free in the UK.
No.
We're not. But we have a heck of a lot of leeway to do a lot of things. We have certain rights, freedoms here. You can argue about what limitations those freedoms have, but where you have it, grab it with both hands and maximise it as much as possible.
Absolutely, we've got a unique opportunity because we wouldn't get those in a lot of the countries that some of us come from. But the other point I was going to get on to, Mohammed, is, and I've mentioned this at events, is when Islam came and Prophet ﷺ said many times, when we talk of the Ummah, I talk about the Ummah of the world. I don't just talk of Muslims.
It's humanity.
Because if you look at his last sermon, it's for the world. He came for the world, and he brought this goodness for the world. And whether it happens in a Muslim or a non-Muslim or a non-faith country, we are deemed to have that responsibility on us to represent humanity.
We're witnesses unto mankind.
Absolutely,
what the Quran
humanity.
tells us.
We are an example to humanity, and therefore we as Muslims need to have that bar, irrespective of whether this is taking place to a Muslim or a non-Muslim. We should be standing with the oppressed.
Absolutely.
Wherever that might be,
and
whatever the cost might be. That is what our faith is about. And that's what I believe it's about.
Stand for justice.
Yes.
Wherever that may be, to whoever it is, for whoever it is.
Well, in our peak time, if you look at the Spanish Inquisition, and I was speaking about this the other day, during the Spanish Inquisition when the Jews were persecuted, and they even had to change their names. They had to have the synagogues underground in Spain, and a lot of them came to the Muslim side. Why? Because there was justice there. We allowed and we looked after people who'd been oppressed. Allowed them to practice their faith. That is the standard we need to have. But I go back. I don't think this is just about the Muslims. I think this is about the wider world, because it shouldn't just be the Muslims' responsibility or any other particular faith's responsibility. We all have a responsibility to make sure genocide doesn't take place. Bigotry is challenged. Hatred is challenged, and that's what this is about. We all need to be standing up, whether you're black, pink, green, a left footer, a right footer, a United fan or a City fan, or even a Blackburn fan. You should all be challenging it. Bring it back to football, it's easier.
Absolutely, and on that note, we'll bring the show to a close.
Thank you very much.
Jazakallah Yusuf Dar for attending here today. Viewers, Jazakallah for watching. And inshallah, we will see you again for the next edition of The Real Agenda.
Jazakallah, assalamu alaikum.